Some people go their entire lives thinking they're just wired differently. They apologize too much. They can't ask for help. They feel guilty when they rest. They overthink every single conversation after it ends. And nobody ever told them why. Here's what psychology has discovered, and what most people are never taught. Some of the habits you consider completely normal, the things you do every single day without thinking, are actually quiet signals. Signals from a childhood where certain emotional needs were never met. This isn't about blame. This isn't about victimhood. This is about finally understanding yourself. Because when you understand where these habits come from, something shifts inside you. You stop fighting yourself. You stop thinking something is fundamentally wrong with you. And you start to heal, maybe for the first time in your adult life. So stay with me. Because what you're about to hear might explain more about you than years of confusion ever did. Emotional introduction. Let's talk about childhood neglect, but not the kind most people imagine. When most people hear the word neglect, they picture extreme situations. Severe poverty. Physical absence. Obvious trauma. But psychology recognizes something far more common and far more invisible. It's called emotional neglect. And unlike physical neglect, it leaves no visible marks. Emotional neglect happens when a child's emotional world is consistently ignored, minimized, or simply never acknowledged. It's not always what was done to you. Often, it's what was never done. Nobody asked how you felt. Nobody sat with you in your sadness. Nobody validated your fear or celebrated your joy with real presence and attention. You were fed, clothed, maybe even loved in practical ways, but emotionally, you were alone in a room full of people. And here's the devastating part. Children are extraordinarily adaptable. When their emotional needs aren't met, they don't fall apart. They adjust. They build habits, patterns, and coping strategies that help them survive the environment they're in. The problem is, those survival strategies follow them into adulthood. Into their relationships. Into their careers. Into their daily lives. And because these habits developed so early, they feel completely natural. They feel like personality. They feel like just who you are. But they're not who you are. They're what you learned to do when no one was there to help you. Let's look at them one by one. Sign number 1, you apologize constantly, even when you've done nothing wrong. You bump into a chair and say sorry. Someone interrupts you mid-sentence, and you apologize for speaking. A friend cancels plans, and somehow you end up feeling like you did something wrong. Most people see this as politeness or social anxiety. But psychology suggests something deeper is happening. Children who grew up in emotionally neglectful homes often learned, very early, that their presence was somehow too much. Their emotions were too loud. Their needs were inconvenient. Their feelings created tension or discomfort in the adults around them. So they learned to shrink. Constant apologizing is a deeply internalized belief that you are the problem. That your existence, your needs, your emotions require ongoing justification. You say sorry not because you've made a mistake, but because somewhere deep in your nervous system, you believe you're always on the verge of being too much for the people around you. Think about it. When did you first learn that your needs were inconvenient? You probably can't pinpoint the moment. Because it wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small moments where you reached out emotionally and found nothing. Or worse, irritation. Dismissal. A parent too busy, too stressed, too emotionally unavailable to meet you where you were. And so you stopped reaching. And you started apologizing for reaching at all. Sign number 2, you struggle to identify what you're actually feeling. Someone asks you, how are you feeling about that? And you genuinely don't know. You know something is happening inside you. There's a heaviness. A tightness. A restlessness you can't name. But when you try to grab the feeling and describe it, it's like trying to hold water in your hands. This isn't a personality quirk. Psychologists have a name for it: alexithymia. Difficulty identifying and describing your own emotional states. And here's where it gets profound. Emotional awareness isn't something we're born with. It's something we learn. We learn it when caregivers reflect our emotions back to us. When a parent says, "I can see you're frustrated right now," they're actually teaching us to recognize frustration. When someone sits with us in sadness and names it gently, they're building our emotional vocabulary. Children who grow up with emotional neglect miss this education entirely. Their emotions were never named, never validated, never explored with curiosity and warmth. So they grew up emotionally fluent in only the most basic categories: happy, sad, fine, angry, and utterly lost in the vast landscape of human emotion that lies between. As adults, they know something is wrong but can't articulate it. They feel disconnected from their own inner world. And because they can't name what they feel, they often can't ask for what they need. Which means they silently suffer. Alone. Even when people who love them are standing right there. Sign number 3, rest makes you feel guilty or uncomfortable. You sit down to relax. Within minutes, an invisible pressure builds. I should be doing something. I'm wasting time. This is lazy. I don't deserve this yet. So you get up. You find something to do. And you wonder why you can never fully switch off. Most people assume this is just ambition, or a strong work ethic. But psychology suggests something more painful might be underneath. Many children in emotionally neglectful homes, especially those where stress, chaos, or high expectations dominated, learned that their value was tied to their usefulness. Love, attention, and approval were connected to performance. To achievement. To being helpful, being good, being productive. Rest was not celebrated. Emotions were not the priority. Getting things done was. And so the child learned, I am worth something when I am doing something. As an adult, this becomes an inability to simply be. Stillness feels threatening. Rest triggers an existential discomfort, because somewhere deep beneath consciousness, your nervous system still believes that if you stop being useful, you become invisible. Unworthy. Forgotten. This is where things become interesting. It's not that you love being busy. It's that being still forces you to feel things you were never taught how to feel. Work is a distraction. Productivity is armor. And rest, quiet, spacious rest, strips that armor away and leaves you alone with an inner world you were never shown how to navigate. Sign number 4, you find it extremely difficult to ask for help. You will quietly struggle for weeks before asking someone for help. You'll figure it out yourself. You'll Google endlessly. You'll lose sleep. You'll tell yourself it's fine, you've got it, you don't want to bother anyone. And if you do finally ask for help, you feel a wave of guilt, vulnerability, or shame immediately after. Most people would call this independence. Self-sufficiency. A good trait to have. But here's what many people fail to understand. There is a difference between chosen independence and conditioned self-reliance. One comes from confidence. The other comes from a childhood where asking for help either didn't work, or wasn't safe. When a child reaches out emotionally and the caregiver is consistently unavailable, distracted, dismissive, or reactive, the child learns a devastating lesson: my needs will not be met. And since unmet needs are painful, the most logical adaptation is to stop needing. Stop asking. Handle everything alone. As adults, asking for help feels almost physically uncomfortable. Not because they're proud, but because their nervous system has been trained to expect rejection, dismissal, or disappointment when they reach out. So they don't reach out. They carry everything alone. And they wonder why they feel so exhausted and so isolated, even in relationships where help is genuinely available. Deep down, they don't fully believe the help will come. Because once, a long time ago, it didn't. Sign number 5, you constantly minimize your own pain. Someone asks how you're doing after something genuinely difficult. And you say, "Oh, I'm fine. It's not a big deal. Others have it so much worse." You are the person who invalidates yourself before anyone else can. You compare your pain downward. You shrink your suffering. You talk yourself out of your own emotions before they've even fully arrived. And here's the painful irony, you often feel more compassion for other people's pain than you do for your own. This pattern has a direct psychological origin. In emotionally neglectful environments, children's emotional reactions are often met with minimization. "You're overreacting. Stop crying, it's not that serious. You think you have it hard? Let me tell you about hard." Over time, the child internalizes this voice. They become their own minimizer. Their own dismisser. They do to themselves exactly what was done to them, because it's the emotional language they were taught. Psychology calls this self-invalidation, and it is one of the most quietly destructive patterns a person can carry. Because when you constantly minimize your pain, you never actually process it. It doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It builds. And it surfaces in ways that confuse you: sudden emotional flooding, unexplained depression, a deep and nameless sadness that visits you in quiet moments when there's nothing left to distract you. The wound doesn't heal because you keep convincing yourself it isn't there. Deep reflection section. Let's pause here for a moment. Because if you've been nodding along, if you've been feeling that quiet recognition, that "this is me" feeling, I want you to understand something important. None of this means your childhood was the worst. None of this means your parents were monsters. Emotional neglect is overwhelmingly unintentional. Most parents who emotionally neglected their children were themselves emotionally neglected. They gave what they had. They operated with the emotional vocabulary they were given. The cycle is old. The wound is ancient. But here is what psychology has consistently shown us. Understanding the origin of a pattern is the first step to breaking it. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are a person who developed very specific strategies to survive a very specific emotional environment. Those strategies were intelligent, adaptive, and necessary then. They are simply not serving you now. And there is a profound difference between those two things. The person who can't ask for help isn't weak, they're someone whose nervous system learned that asking was dangerous. The person who can't rest isn't lazy in reverse, they're someone who was taught that worth requires constant proof. The person who minimizes their pain isn't strong, they're someone who was never given permission to feel it. Here's the question worth sitting with. What would your life look like if you finally gave yourself the permission that no one gave you as a child? Permission to feel without justification. Permission to rest without guilt. Permission to ask for help without shame. Permission to say, "I'm not okay," without immediately qualifying it with, "but others have it worse." What would that look like? This is where things become interesting, because most people never ask themselves this question. They simply continue living inside habits they didn't choose, wondering why life feels like such an effort. Why connection feels so difficult. Why they always feel slightly separate from the world, watching others seem to belong with an ease that feels eternally out of reach. The answer isn't that you're different in some permanent, unfixable way. The answer is that you're carrying weight that was placed on you before you were old enough to question whether you had to carry it. Psychological deeper dive: why these habits feel so normal. Here's a question psychology finds fascinating. Why do the habits formed in childhood feel like personality rather than conditioning? The answer lies in timing. The brain is most plastic, most shapeable, in the early years of life. The patterns formed between birth and roughly age 10 become the default operating system for how we interpret the world, how we respond to people, and how we understand ourselves. When emotional neglect happens during this window, the resulting adaptations don't get stored as things I learned to cope. They get stored as how the world works and who I am. This is why a 40-year-old can still have the reflexive apology of a child who was once told they were too much. This is why a successful, accomplished adult can still feel a flash of guilt when they lie down in the middle of the afternoon. The adult knows better. But the nervous system, still running that early operating system, doesn't get the memo. What many people fail to understand is that healing from emotional neglect isn't about uncovering dramatic memories or having a single breakthrough moment. It's slower, and in some ways more profound than that. It's about repetition in the opposite direction. Learning, again and again, that your emotions are valid. That asking for help doesn't end in rejection. That rest is not a punishment waiting to happen. That you are allowed to exist, fully, without constant justification. It's building, slowly and patiently, the emotional foundation that should have been built in childhood, but wasn't. And it's possible. Not easy. Not fast. But completely, genuinely possible. Conclusion. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with emotional neglect. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being in a room full of people, in friendships, in relationships, even in families, and still feeling fundamentally unseen. Because when the deepest parts of who you are were never acknowledged, you grow up half believing those parts don't exist. Or worse, that they shouldn't. You learn to present a curated version of yourself. Capable. Fine. Not needing much. Easy to be around. And people like you. People might even love you. But somewhere underneath the surface, you wonder if they would love the real you, the one who isn't always okay, the one who doesn't always have it together, the one who sometimes just needs someone to sit with them in the hard moments without offering solutions or changing the subject. What I want you to hear, really hear, is this. That person is worth knowing. The version of you that has needs. That gets overwhelmed. That doesn't have the right words for what they're feeling. That sometimes needs help and sometimes just needs to rest. That version isn't the broken one. That version is the real one. And the habits we talked about today, the apologizing, the self-silencing, the guilt, the inability to ask for help, these aren't character flaws to be ashamed of. They are love letters from your younger self. Proof of how hard you worked to survive in an environment that didn't give you everything you needed. You adapted. You survived. You made it here. Now comes the next part. Not survival. Not just coping. But actually learning, at whatever age you are right now, to give yourself what you needed then. That begins with awareness. And awareness begins with exactly what you just did. You paid attention. You asked the question. You looked at yourself with curiosity instead of judgment. That's not a small thing. For someone who was never taught that their inner world mattered, choosing to look at it at all is an act of quiet courage. So keep going. Call to action. If something in this video felt uncomfortably familiar, if you kept thinking, how does this describe me so accurately, you're not alone. More people than you could ever imagine carry these patterns without ever understanding where they came from. Drop a comment below and tell me which sign resonated with you most. You don't have to share more than you're comfortable with. But sometimes, just naming it, even anonymously, even to strangers on the internet, is its own small form of healing. And if you believe in the power of understanding yourself more deeply, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from, psychology that doesn't talk at you, but sits with you.